In 43 AD, 4 Roman legions landed on the Kent coast under Emperor Claudius and pushed inland. They needed a river crossing, somewhere to build a bridge and maintain supply lines back to the continent. They chose the Thames at its narrowest navigable point, just before it widens into an estuary. That decision created London. The settlement was called Londinium. Within a decade, it held merchants from Gaul, soldiers from Syria, traders from North Africa. The Romans built their bridge exactly where London Bridge stands today. 17 years after its founding, Queen Boudicca of the Iceni tribe in East Anglia led a revolt against Roman occupation. Her army marched on Londinium in 60 AD and burned it to the ground. Archaeological digs have found a layer of red ash beneath the modern city, physical evidence of that destruction. The Romans rebuilt. A forum was constructed in the 80s AD. By the turn of the 2nd century, Londinium held an estimated 60,000 people and had replaced Camulodunum, modern Colchester, as the provincial capital of Britannia. It had the largest basilica north of the Alps, temples, bathhouses, an amphitheater, and a large fort for the city garrison. Between 190 and 225 AD, a defensive wall was built around the landward side of the city, approximately 3 kilometers long, 6 meters high, and 2.5 meters thick. It incorporated 6 of the 7 historic city gates: Ludgate, Newgate, Aldersgate, Cripplegate, Bishopsgate, and Aldgate. Only Moorgate was added later in medieval times. That wall defined London's boundaries for the next 1,600 years. In 410 AD, Emperor Honorius sent word to Britain, "You're on your own." The legions pulled out. Without Rome, Londinium's trade networks, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, simply stopped. Roman currency became worthless. A city of perhaps 50,000 people dwindled within a generation to a few hundred squatters living in the ruins. The Anglo-Saxons who arrived in Britain after the Romans avoided the old Roman city. They saw it as haunted, the work of giants. Around the 600s and 70s, they built a new settlement about a mile west of the Roman walls, along what is now the Strand between Aldwych and Trafalgar Square. They called it Londonwich, London Trading Town. At its peak, it housed around 8,000 people. In 604 AD, King Sabert of Essex converted to Christianity. Under the patronage of King Ethelbert of Kent, a bishop named Mellitus founded the first St. Paul's Cathedral, on the site, tradition holds, of an old Roman temple. It burned in 675 and was attacked again by Danish raiders in 961. Starting around 830 AD, Norse raids became frequent. London was sacked in 842, then again in 851. The Danish Great Heathen Army, which had been raiding across England since 865, wintered in London in 871. The city remained in Danish hands until 886, when King Alfred the Great of Wessex retook it. Alfred abandoned Londonwich and moved everyone back inside the old Roman walled city, far easier to defend. He repaired the ancient walls and recut the defensive ditches. The city was renamed Londonburg. The old Saxon settlement gradually earned a new name, Ealdwick, the Old Settlement. That survives today as Aldwych. Over the following century, London changed hands multiple times between Saxon and Danish rulers. In 1016, King Kenat made London his capital. When Edward the Confessor became king in 1042, he rebuilt Westminster Abbey just west of the city and moved his court there. That split, the city for commerce, Westminster for power, shaped London's geography permanently. Edward the Confessor died childless in January 1066. Harold Godwinson was crowned king, but William, Duke of Normandy, claimed Edward had promised him the throne. Harold first marched north to defeat a Norwegian invasion, then rushed his exhausted army south. On October 14, 1066, Harold met William at the Battle of Hastings. By nightfall, Harold was dead. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey. William didn't trust London. Its population had backed Harold. He built not one, but three fortresses to control it. The most significant became the Tower of London, starting as a timber fortification and quickly replaced by England's first stone castle. Its central keep, the White Tower, rose 90 feet high with walls 12 feet thick. William also issued a charter in 1067 confirming the city's existing rights, privileges, and laws, a calculated gesture to keep London's merchants cooperative. In 1097, William's son William Rufus began construction of Westminster Hall, which became the focus of the Palace of Westminster. In 1176, construction began on a stone London Bridge, finished in 1209 after 33 years of building. Shops and houses lined both sides. The bridge had a chapel, a drawbridge, and traders' heads displayed on spikes. For over 600 years, it was the only crossing of the Thames in London. By 1100, London's population stood at roughly 15,000. By 1300, it had grown to 80,000. The city's merchants organized into craft guilds, goldsmiths, fishmongers, drapers, mercers, which grew powerful enough that the king had to negotiate with them. When the barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, London's support was decisive. The city extracted its own concessions, the right to elect its own mayor annually, and freedom from arbitrary taxation. In 1216, baronial rebels called in Prince Louis of France, who occupied London and was acclaimed King of England in St. Paul's Cathedral. After King John's death in 1217, Louis's English supporters defected to John's son Henry III, and Louis withdrew. London's Jewish community had been present since around 1070. Over the following 2 centuries, persecution escalated. A punitive levy in 1224, Henry III's confiscation of their principal synagogue in 1232, on the grounds that their chanting was audible in a neighboring church. The murder of 500 Jews during the Second Barons' War in 1264. In 1290, King Edward I issued the Edict of Expulsion. The entire Jewish community was forced out of England. Their property was seized, and many were robbed and killed as they left. They would not be permitted to return until the 17th century. In 1348, ships from Europe arrived at London's docks. They carried rats, and on those rats, fleas, and in those fleas, Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. Within 2 years, between a third and half of London's population was dead. A city of 80,000 was suddenly half empty. Entire streets were abandoned. Mass graves were dug in fields outside the city walls. By the late 14th century, London was growing again, but taxes were rising and serfdom unchanged. In 1381, workers and peasants marched on London. Led by Wat Tyler, they stormed the Tower of London and executed the Lord Chancellor, Archbishop Simon Sudbury, and the Lord Treasurer. They burned the palace of John of Gaunt. The teenage King Richard II met with them and made promises. Tyler was stabbed to death by Lord Mayor William Walworth at Smithfield. The revolt was crushed, and its leaders hunted down and executed. By 1500, London's population had recovered to about 50,000. By 1600, it was 200,000. By 1650, nearly 400,000, the largest city in Europe. Henry VIII's break with Rome in the 1530s was the engine of that expansion. The Pope refused to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn. Henry declared himself head of a new Church of England and dissolved the monasteries. Before the Reformation, more than half the area of London belonged to religious houses. Once Henry seized that property, it came onto the market. Aristocrats and wealthy merchants bought it and built grand houses. The king took the Hospital of St. James and rebuilt it as St. James's Palace Hampton Court Palace had already been under construction since 1514. Henry built the Palace of Whitehall in 1532, the largest in Europe at the time. It caught fire and burned in 1698. The Globe Theatre opened on the South Bank in 1599. Shakespeare and Ben Jonson had moved their productions there because the Lord Mayor had banned theatrical performances within the city's jurisdiction. On the South Bank, beyond his authority, they built the Globe. The East India Company was founded in 1600 and would ultimately come to rule India, remaining one of the central institutions in British life for 2.5 centuries. Henry VIII's daughter Elizabeth I came to the throne in 1558. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been beheaded on charges of adultery. Elizabeth's reign was a period of rapid commercial expansion. Trade extended beyond Western Europe to Russia, the Levant, and the Americas. London's population grew from roughly 50,000 in 1530 to 225,000 by 1605. Being childless, Elizabeth chose James VI of Scotland to succeed her, launching the Stuart dynasty. In 1605, a Catholic faction attempted to blow up Parliament. On November 5th, Guy Fawkes was caught in the cellars of the Palace of Westminster with barrels of gunpowder. He was executed. The date is still marked annually with fireworks and the burning of his effigy. In 1616, architect Inigo Jones began the Queen's House at Greenwich, the first classically trained architecture built in England. 3 years later came the Banqueting House in Whitehall. In 1642, civil war broke out between King Charles I and Parliament. London sided with Parliament. The city organized a makeshift army and built earthen fortifications around the entire urban area, encompassing Westminster and Southwark. The financial resources of the city proved a crucial contribution to the parliamentary victory. Charles I was executed in 1649. The monarchy was restored under Charles II in 1660. The Great Plague of 1665 killed approximately 60,000 people, 1/5 of London's population. Samuel Pepys chronicled it. On September 4th, 1665, he wrote that 7,400 people had died in 1 week, of them 6,000 from the plague. On Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, a fire broke out at a bakery on Pudding Lane. It had been a hot, dry summer. An east wind was blowing. For 4 days, London burned. When it was over, 85% of the city within the walls was destroyed. 13,000 houses, 87 churches, including the old St. Paul's Cathedral, 44 livery company halls, the Royal Exchange. Roughly 6 people died in the fire itself, but 100,000 were left homeless. Christopher Wren proposed rebuilding the city on a new plan: wide thoroughfares, classical architecture, open squares. It was almost entirely rejected. Property rights were too complicated and rebuilding too urgent. Streets were rebuilt largely following their medieval layouts, but Parliament's Rebuilding of London Act 1666 mandated brick and stone construction in place of timber. In 1707, the Act of Union merged the Scottish and English parliaments, establishing the Kingdom of Great Britain. In 1708, Wren's St. Paul's Cathedral was completed. On his birthday, Lloyd's Coffee House became Lloyd's of London, the insurance market. Jonathan's Coffee House became the London Stock Exchange. In 1735, Robert Walpole moved into 10 Downing Street, the first prime minister to use it as an official residence. Westminster Bridge opened in 1750, London's first second crossing of the Thames after 6 centuries, with only London Bridge. Blackfriars Bridge followed in 1769. In 1762, King George III acquired Buckingham House from the Duke of Buckingham. It was enlarged over the next 75 years by architects including John Nash. In 1780, the Gordon Riots, an uprising by Protestants against Catholic emancipation, led by Lord George Gordon. caused severe damage to Catholic churches and homes across the city. 285 rioters were killed. That same year, the Tower of London held its only American prisoner. Henry Lawrence, a former president of the Continental Congress and founding father, captured at sea by the Royal Navy and charged with treason after evidence was found of a treaty between the United States and the Netherlands, he was released on December 21st, 1781, in exchange for General Charles Cornwallis. In 1783, the last public execution was held at Tyburn, what is now Marble Arch. In 1798, Frankfurt banker Nathan Mayer Rothschild arrived in London with capital provided by his father, Amschel Mayer Rothschild, and established a banking house in the city. The Rothschilds went on to finance railways worldwide and the Suez Canal. In 1801, London had just over 1 million people. By 1851, 2.5 million. By 1901, 6.7 million. Sadia, the largest city in the world. In 1829, Home Secretary Robert Peel established the Metropolitan Police, the first professional police force, covering the entire urban area. Officers earned the nicknames Bobbies and Peelers after him. The first railway in London opened in 1836. London Bridge to Greenwich. The major termini followed. Euston in 1837. Paddington in 1838. Waterloo in 1848. King's Cross in 1850. St. Pancras in 1863. In 1851, the Great Exhibition opened in Hyde Park. The Crystal Palace, a massive iron and glass structure, attracted 6 million visitors. It was a deliberate display of British industrial dominance. Big Ben, a 13.5-ton bell, was hung in the clock tower of the Houses of Parliament in 1859. The Houses of Parliament had to be rebuilt after the old Palace of Westminster burned in 1834. In 1863, the first section of the London Underground opened between Paddington and Farringdon Street, the world's first subterranean railway. Raw sewage was pumped directly into the Thames. In the summer of 1858, the great stink, heat, concentrating the sewage in the river, was severe enough that Parliament had to suspend its sessions. Engineer Joseph Bazalgette was commissioned to build over 2,100 kilometers of tunnels and pipes to take waste away from the river. His sewage system is still in use today. In 1854, John Snow proved cholera spread through contaminated water, not air, by mapping cases around a single water pump on Broad Street in Soho. Cholera outbreaks in the 1830s and 1840s had already killed tens of thousands. Tower Bridge was completed in 1894. In 1888, Jack the Ripper murdered at least 5 women in Whitechapel. He was never caught. That same year, the County of London was established and administered by the first elected London-wide body, the London County Council. A large Irish population, and many of them refugees from the Great Famine of 1845 to 1849, settled in the city during this period, at one point making up roughly 20% of London's population. Most lived in overcrowded slums. Charles Dickens documented that world in Oliver Twist and elsewhere. The National Gallery was established in 1824. The Victoria and Albert Museum opened in 1857. Tea merchant Henry Charles Harrod took over a small grocer's shop in Knightsbridge in 1849. During World War I, German Zeppelin airships carried out bombing raids on London, killing approximately 700 people. The largest single explosion in London during the war was the Silvertown explosion of 1917. A munitions factory containing 50 tons of TNT exploded, killing 73 and injuring 400. The British Broadcasting Company transmitted its first programs from Savoy Hill in 1922. The first Football Association Cup final was held at Wembley Stadium in 1923. London's population reached an all-time peak of 8.6 million in 1939. Through the 1930s, large numbers of Jewish immigrants fleeing Nazi Germany settled in the East End. Political extremism flourished in the same years. The Communist Party and the British Union of Fascists both built serious support. Clashes between them came to a head at the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. Between September 7th, 1940 and May 10th, 1941, German bombers hit London almost every night. 71 separate raids dropping over 18,000 tons of high explosive. One raid in December 1940, called the Second Great Fire of London, created a firestorm across the city. St. Paul's Cathedral survived. By the war's end, just under 30,000 Londoners had been killed by bombing, over 50,000 seriously injured, and hundreds of thousands made homeless. Hundreds of thousands of children had been evacuated to the countryside before the bombing began. In 1948, the Summer Olympics were held at Wembley Stadium, while the city was still rebuilding and rationing was still in force. That same year, the Windrush generation began arriving from the Caribbean, followed by waves of immigration from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, and later Eastern Europe. In 1952, the Great Smog lasted 5 days. Coal heating combined with weather conditions created pollution dense enough to kill between 10,000 and 12,000 people, though the government at the time put the figure at 4,000. The Clean Air Act of 1956 was passed in response, mandating smokeless zones. The Brixton riots of April 10th to 12th, 1981 reflected racial tensions that had built since the 1950s. In 1986, the Greater London Council was abolished under Margaret Thatcher's government, leaving London as the only major city in the world without a central administration. The Docklands, which had declined because they could not accommodate modern container ships, were redeveloped from the mid-1980s onward. The first Canary Wharf Tower was completed in 1991. The Thames Barrier, built to protect London from tidal surges following a storm that killed hundreds in 1953, was completed in 1982. The first trains ran through the Channel Tunnel to Paris and Brussels in 1994. Shakespeare's Globe reopened on Bankside in 1997. The Tate Modern and the London Eye both opened in 2000. London-wide government was restored in 2000 with the creation of the Greater London Authority. On May 4th, 2000, Ken Livingstone won the first direct election for mayor of London. On July 6th, 2005, London won the right to host the 2012 Olympics, making it the first city to host the modern games 3 times. The following day, July 7th, bombs exploded on 3 underground trains and a bus near King's Cross, killing 52 people and injuring over 750. In 2004, planning permission was granted for the Shard. At 1,016 feet, it became London's tallest building. In August 2011, London was the starting point for riots that spread across several boroughs and into towns across England, the largest in modern English history. The 2012 Olympics transformed East London and produced the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. By 2011, London's population had passed 8 million for the first time in decades. White British residents were less than half the population for the first time. Over 300 languages are spoken in the city today. The UK officially left the European Union on January 31st, 2020. A transition period ended on December 31st, 2020. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know and comment that on which topic you want next video. Take care, and I see you in next video.